tell us about your TV show.
Well, the TV show is called Horsemaster with Julie Goodnight, and it airs 52 weeks a year, 3 times a week on the RFD network, the Rural Farm Network, which everybody that gets satellite gets it, and most cable systems now offer it as well. But and it's kind of a reality-type show. I hate reality shows, so I hate even describing it that way. But I say it's a reality show because it's totally unscripted. Nothing occurs. There's no rehearsal. There's nothing occurs off the camera. And so it is each week I work with a different horse and rider, and sometimes it's solving problems. A lot of the time it's problem-oriented. Sometimes it's just riders that want to perform better. So, like, for instance, we did a great episode last year on flying lead changes, and this was a really good rider with a really great horse. She just was struggling with that step to flying lead changes. And so it's either problem behavior, a spoiled horse, or, spooky horse or something like that, or a rider that's looking to advance their skills. And so we film 24 episodes a year, and then those all rerun once. And so of the 24 episodes, each of the 24 is a unique horse and rider that I'm working with. And we try to just deal with common everyday problems that people have. We don't like to deal with extreme. I don't want to deal with anyone if what I have to say to them is you need to get a different horse, So we look for the common problems that everybody can relate to, and it just will help people improve their horsemanship.
And do you find that there are, like, if you had to name the top 5 common problems, what would those be?
It would be the rider, the rider, the rider, the rider, and the rider. So,
definitely.
And it's usually poor technique, poor leadership skills. People don't really fully understand horses. A lot of times people ignore really important stuff, and then they make something out of behavior that means nothing, So I have to be very patient and understanding. I'm 53 years old, and I've spent my entire life around horses, so I have a lot of experience. But the older I get, the more it amazes me that people don't see stuff. They don't see and understand the horse's behavior for what it is. Horses are trying desperately to communicate to the person, I can't do that, or that's hurting me.
Right.
Me around when you're not the boss. But I think we as humans, we get so wrapped up in our own head that we just, and I don't know if people don't believe that horses are communicating to them, or they're just not open to it or reading it. But sometimes things seem very obvious to me that the person hasn't ever even thought of or considered. So,
right.
And then, when I say the mistake is always the riders or the handlers, oftentimes we know intellectually what we're supposed to be doing, but our body is not even remotely doing that. So we think we're doing it. Like we think we're giving the horse a release of the rein when he does the right thing, but you're not. And so having that objective set of eyes come in and say, I know you think you're doing that, but you're not. Or I know you think you're not backing up, doing that groundwork, but you are. So some people just aren't really aware of exactly what they're doing with their body. They think they're doing one thing, but they're doing something else.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Julie, we were talking about the most common things that you find, and we were talking about the rider, and you were saying that sometimes the rider just isn't aware of what they are or not doing. So let's elaborate on that a little bit more. I'm sure it's very individual to the person. Is it just awareness in general? Is it, something physically, or what have you found in your experiences with working with so many people?
Well, I think it's all of the above. In my experience teaching people, that some people have less awareness of what they're doing with their body than others. There are some people that have very poor spatial awareness, and when you're doing groundwork with horses, for instance, it's all about the spatial awareness. You know, whether you're leading a horse or working him in a round pen. And I've been told by someone that knows a lot more about it than I do that sometimes that's actually a learning disability that certain people have, and that it's somewhat of a benign learning disability. In other words, they make it all the way through college not knowing they have this learning disability. Okay. And which makes them unaware of spatial issues. And that's probably a very inarticulate statement. That was just my understanding of what this educator, actually the special education teacher, was telling me about, because I had made that comment in a clinic that some people just really struggle with understanding. They don't see when the horse is moving into them. Mm-hmm. They don't notice when they're opening the space. But so I think for some people there's that. Okay. Also, I think there is a physical and a emotional connection. For instance, take fear, for example. A lot of people struggling with fear issues around horses. And I'm a big believer in the mind, body, and spirit connection. And if you have a thought, it manifests in some way physically in your body. And that's why, for instance, if you've ever had the joy of riding a super sensitive and well-trained horse, you just think about the cue and they do it. Oh, yeah. You don't actively give them a cue. And that's not because they're magic. It's because they're very sensitive animals. And so when you think about, okay, I think I'm going to cue the horse for canter now, there is a minute change in your body as you think about the cue that the horse responds to. And so that, mental, physical, and emotional connection, if you're having an emotion, it tends to want to manifest physically somehow, particularly fear and confidence. So people start doing things like pulling back on the reins and perching forward and going into these positions that we associate with, fearful riders. But they have no idea they're doing that because the emotion of fear is taking over their physical body language. Right. And so I think that, it's not used. Rarely is it the case that somebody just has so much lack of talent that they can't do this sport. Usually, if they're really struggling, it's more that they don't have an awareness of what they're doing or what needs to be done and what they need to change. And if you've been riding for a significant amount of time in an incorrect position, your muscle memory is so ingrained in that position that it's really hard to combat it. And so, again, yeah. Definitely. I mean, we all have bad habits. And like you said, if you've been riding for a long time with that particular, in quote, bad habit, it's really hard to retrain your body. And it takes a different awareness level to, say, oh, I felt, my leg doing this, or I'm slouching, or, and just it takes such a huge awareness level, I think, to correct that. I myself, having worked in computers for so many years, I tend to slouch in front of the computer, and that transferred over to my riding. And absolutely. And so it's really... Yeah, because, most riding errors are posture problems. Well, and I remember... Most of the mistakes you make on the horse, just in terms of your position, you would do the same thing on the ground. Right. So I remember one thing that, watching you at the Rocky Mountain Horse Expo a couple years ago, you were saying about
the legs and how it fits and the ankles and the knees, and that most English disciplines, they want your feet forward, so your toes are in. Mm-hmm. And I think you were saying that anatomically, it's more correct to have your toes out. It's more comfortable on the joints of the ankles and the knees. Is that, did I remember that correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. And, I would say that, I grew up being taught you have to keep your toes forward, toes in as well. I think fortunately, well, really it was Sally Swift that sort of brought this new awareness to equitation. That, and she was one of the first ones to say that makes no sense anatomically at all to bring your toes in. Because first of all, when you bring your toes in, your leg comes off the horse. Right. And your lower leg, and that doesn't make sense. We want the leg on the horse. But yeah, that's pretty much what I said. I think fortunately that toes in thing has sort of faded. There are still some trainers out there that are advocating it. But I hope anyway, that's kind of going by the wayside. But, that's why people get knee and ankle pain, is because they're kind of twisting their leg in an unnatural position. They're already in an unnatural position anyway, just sitting on a horse. We weren't really designed to sit on a propane tank. We were designed to run with our, in complete vertical alignment with our body. And
right. So I find that funny because, horses aren't really meant to take a rider either, the way that their spine is built. Cows are better suited for riders, and apparently humans, like you said, are not meant to ride a propane tank. That's funny.
Well, yeah, we got a little ego problem with riding a cow. It's just not quite the same picture.
It's not a romantic picture, is it? Well, unless you're a cowboy and you're a bull rider, then I don't know if that's necessarily romantic, but oh, that's funny. But I loved that you were saying that, because I find physically for my body, it's just, I roll my inner thighs in and then my calves come off, and it's just so uncomfortable, and it's so much easier and more comfortable for me to roll it out. And it was funny because my cousin was visiting from California, and she rode as a young girl, and she's in her 50s as well. And she's like, Kim, why are your toes out? I said, because it's more comfortable.
Yeah, well, and I could do it when I was 18. Now if I try to do it, I get cramps in my hips. So I think it's also, possibly our sport has evolved somewhat because the consumer is an older age group now. And, I would say, without having given a lot of thought to this in advance, certainly the business and the industry of horses, at least the recreational side, has changed as the average age of the participant has risen.
Right.
So, now we're at a point where I'm on the young end of the scale of the majority of people involved in horses these days.
So here's a big philosophical question for you, and sorry, I'm just going to totally catch you off guard, but where would you like to see the horse industry move into? Do you think where we're at today is good? Do you see where we could improve, better for riders, better for horses? What's your philosophy there?
Well, I think one thing that has changed a lot in the last couple of decades is that the horse people are much more interested in education, and that it still surprises me when I'm at an expo and somebody comes up and says, we haven't bought any horses yet, but we're going to. But right now, we're just working on learning as much as we can. And that didn't used to be the way it was.
Right.
It was a very fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. Get a horse and then learn. And so I think that has been a trend that has really helped horses and the horse industry. We're in a very tough juncture right now, and because, first of all, we have the aging baby boomer population, which is driving and funding the recreational horse industry right now, and they have been for some time. But that crowd isn't going to be around and ain't going to be involved in horses forever.
Right.
And so the next generation, the X generation, is not very horsey at all. There's very little participation from that generation. But then the Y generation seems to be, it's kind of coming full circle. Many people think that's because the baby boomers are introducing their grandchildren to horses. So that's good. But I do think that we've been riding this gravy train of the baby boomers for a while now without looking to the future enough. And so how we grow the industry at the younger end. And, the truth is most people don't have time for horses when they're in their 20s and 30s because they're raising families and launching careers. And that's okay if we can just get them trickling back in, when they get a little older. So I think that's one really big issue of concern. Okay. And then also certainly the...
So, Julie, I'm sorry that we had to interrupt you there. You were telling us about your thoughts where you'd like to see the horse industry grow. And we were talking about the baby boomers and getting their grandchildren involved. And then you were about to mention your second point, so...
Well, I was, I think for me, the big second area of concern in the industry today is the situation we've gotten into with the unwanted horse.
Right.
And this perfect storm of the recession and overbreeding and indiscriminate breeding that's been going on for a long time. And, I would include the whole PMU thing in that.
Uh-huh.
And, but it's not just PMU. People have been indiscriminately breeding horses for a long time.
And just so people know what PMU is, Primarian, what is it, pregnant mare?
Pregnant mare urine. And
right,
unfortunately, that came to a screeching halt when the medical profession said women shouldn't take Premarin anymore. But that coincided right with this, the anti-slaughter legislation,
right,
and the recession and the PMU industry folding, which flooded, all of these unwanted horses onto the market as well. And so we've gotten ourselves into a real pickle where the value of the lower end horses has dropped to nothing, so if you had a $2,500 horse, or $1,500 horse, that horse is now worth almost nothing because there's so many people desperate to get rid of their horses.
Right.
That you can find them for free all day long. I know several people right now trying to give away horses. So we knocked the bottom out of the market. And then, so the side effect of that is that the good breeders of horses have quit breeding because there's no market for the horses they're breeding. So at some point in time, 5 years down the road, we're going to be suffering from a real lack of quality horses because the best breeders aren't breeding now.
Right.
So it's kind of a mess that is, I think, is only just beginning to unfold. And I know there's a lot of people concerned about this stuff, and the American Horse Council and a lot of state horse councils are trying to work to address these issues. And, hopefully things will settle down in the future. But I think there's some real uncertainties about what's going to happen in the future with the market.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. Well, thank you for sharing your insights, and especially with your vast experience and everything, and just, stuff for us to look out for, and hopefully we can turn it around, because I know that, the cat and dog population has gone through similar things, and I think they're still going through it, with breeders that, the puppy mills and things, and just...
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about those kinds of comparisons, and of course us horse people are loath to talk about that, because a dangerous thing is when people start treating horses like pets.
Right.
And they aren't dogs and they aren't cats.
Right.
But so we're very sketchy about and concerned about, like in California, they're really trying to bring horses into the same category as pets. And that just really, creates problems. But I think it is kind of an interesting comparison just to look at what has happened, how you got there to begin with, and then what control measures have been successful in the pet, dog and cat world. And there are undoubtedly some lessons and some parallels we could draw from that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with that. So we have about 2 or 3 minutes left. Is there something specific that you wanted to make sure that the listeners, knew about, or anything like that? I'm going to leave the floor open for you.
Well, thank you. I hadn't really given any thought to that, but I think it would be good to let people know that on my website, which is JulieGoodnight.com, there is a section of my website called the Training Library. It's on the main menu, and it's got hundreds of articles, mostly Q&As, that I have written over the last 20 years. And almost any problem you could have with a horse, I've written about at some point or another. And I know a lot of people have told me that it's been a really useful resource for them to just be able to go back and when they reach a, stumbling block or a plateau with their horse, to be able to go read about some problems somebody had with a similar horse, or, how to get by that. So that's a great resource for people. Also, a lot of people use it to educate their friends or educate their, the manager of their barn or whatever. Sometimes, us horse people are kind of funny about pushing our opinions off on others. And often giving advice to someone else is not very well received. And so sometimes if you can print out an article, for instance, let's say on the hand feeding of treats to horses, I have quite a few articles about that and why it creates problems. And so rather than go to your friend and say, you shouldn't do that, you can go print out the article and say, here's an interesting article. I thought you might enjoy reading it.
Right.
So it's a useful resource for people. And I think, for me, the longer I go in my career, the more amazed I am by horses and what they put up with and the ways in which they communicate. And so I think that, to me, my big mission is just to help people understand horses and their behavior better. And then in the end, everybody benefits from that, the horses and the humans.
Absolutely. And